always from the heart of the city, and now on demand 24/7 on the CHFI website. This is the soundtrack to softly scented Magnolia Nights. And I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers. Thomas Hood wrote, "I remember the house where I was born, the little window where the sun came peeping in at morn." There are certain windows we will never forget. The window in one's bedroom through which one anxiously watched lightning streak across the sky and woke the next morning to a gentle shaft of sunlight. Another window in the house where you sat and watched the people pass by, or where you spent some quiet time savoring the smells of spring and summer, and through the years watched the magnolia bloom ever more beautiful. Magnolia Nights with Lovers and Other Strangers from CHFI.com. Lovers and Other Strangers, online and on demand now from CHFI.com. Loreena Mckennitt with the Mummers Dance and Melissa Etheridge, and Come to My Window. We planted 2 beautiful magnolia trees on our property on the occasions of the birth of both my children. I've talked about this over the years on the radio. A galaxy in front and a saucer magnolia in the back. And every spring they both burst forth into beautiful bloom. And every spring we take a picture of both our children beside their trees to show how they have grown just as their trees have. Even though both were not planted late into the year as the tree growers suggest, because the soil is at its warmest late summer into early autumn, they both have flourished and have been a reminder that all growing things on this planet, including our children, need a place in the sun to stand proud and tall, a little gentle shaping, occasionally to promote better growth, food, plenty of water, the occasional treat, and lots of fresh air. They will again have lots of that this summer. Our saucer magnolia that we planted just before my daughter was born is her tree that we've watched grow and mirror her own growing stages. Both have grown straight and strong. The tree gives us beautifully fragrant, waxy pink flowers every spring. The roots of her magnolia have reached out to take nourishment from the soil, and the values we're trying to impart in her are also taking root. My son's magnolia, the galaxy in front of the house, planted just before he was born, is also growing well, just as he is. Some neighbors on our street commented on the lush leaves and the fact that it was filled with so many dark purple flowers. They, too, are so fragrant. A year or so back, while I cut the drip line a little wider, my wife and a neighbor pruned some of the branches. Maybe that had something to do with it. I must admit that I was a little disappointed in her decision to cut some near the base, but as she reminded me, sometimes trees must be pruned to promote better growth. I thought we might spend the hour admiring the trees we sometimes forget to notice until the autumn, when their leaves turn such a magnificent color. My family lives in an older neighborhood, so most of the trees have grown to full maturity. They clean the air of pollutants, offer us shade in the summer, and protect our homes in winter. And if we listen closely when the wind rushes by, we can even hear the trees make music, as sweet as a gentle lullaby that would lull you to sleep, even outdoors, when the weather is warm. Lovers and Other Strangers from CHFI.com. Lovers and Other Strangers from CHFI.com. We met Rod Stewart by the witness tree and Bobbie Gentry with Billie Joe. Who knows what the flowers were that she was throwing off that bridge? Could have been magnolia blooms. In that part of the world, magnolia trees are in bloom right now. Scarlett O'Hara was not beautiful, but men seldom realized it when caught by her charm. In her face were too sharply blended the delicate features of her mother, a coast aristocrat of French descent, and the heavy ones of her florid Irish father. But it was an arresting face, pointed of chin, square of jaw. Her eyes were pale green without a touch of hazel, starred with bristly black lashes, and slightly tilted at the ends. Above them, her thick black brows slanted upward, cutting a startling oblique line in her magnolia white skin. That skin so prized by Southern women, and so carefully guarded with bonnets, veils, and mittens against hot Georgia sun. Seated with Stewart and Brent Tarleton in the cool shade of the porch of Tara, her father's plantation, that bright April afternoon of 1861, she made a pretty picture. The opening lines of Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, published in 1936 by Macmillan. Movie makers also liked the tie-in with magnolia trees. There was a 1989 film called Steel Magnolias that starred Julia Roberts. As it said in one review, Roberts plays a young woman stricken with severe diabetes who chooses to live her life to the fullest despite her bad health. Much of the action centers around a Louisiana beauty shop where the women get together to discuss the goings-on of their lives. The screenplay was by R. Harling, based on his partially autobiographical play. Sweet, poignant, and often hilarious, yet just as often overwrought. Shirley MacLaine is funny as a bitter divorcee. Dolly Parton is sexy and fun as the hairdresser. But Sally Field and Roberts go off the deep end and make it all entirely too weepy. Unquote, that according to one source. Daryl Hannah and Olympia Dukakis also starred in that film. And then there was this one. Things fall down. People look up. And when it rains, it pours. The tagline about another film, a much darker film, simply called Magnolia, that starred Tom Cruise, Julianne Moore, William H. Macy, John C. Reilly, and Jason Robards. It too features a cast of very familiar faces. It is a creepy film about a group of seemingly unrelated people and how their lives intersect by the film's end. According to one internet source, Paul Thomas Anderson wrote the screenplay in only 2 weeks while staying at the Vermont cabin of William H. Macy. The reason? He was afraid to go outside after he'd seen a snake. I've often seen garden snakes on my property, but it hasn't inspired me to write a film about my magnolia trees. Two completely different films. The only thing they share in common is the tree that is at the center of our program this hour. Lovers and Other Strangers from CHFI.com. Lovers and Other Strangers, now online at CHFI.com. Anna Nalick and Breathe, 2 a.m. And Sting, If I Ever Lose My Faith in You. That song by Sting reminds me of the film Magnolia for a few reasons. Think about the lyrics. One of the best cities in the world for magnolias and their magnificent blossoms is New Orleans. I've always liked this writing, and I quote, "Because it is so slow and ponderous, New Orleans becomes a place to feel, to experience, to notice sounds and sights and colors. The curious big moths that moonflowers attract. Sweet olive bushes that always seem covered with tiny hidden flowers. Mockingbirds that sing all night in the deep summer. Wisps of fog wrapped around live oaks like ragged ribbons. Ginger lilies so heavy and waxy pink you touch them to be sure they are not made of plastic. Magnolias opening their huge heavy petals almost visibly under the day's sun. The airs and flavors of the city crowd your senses. Some lines later, this author writes, "There are trees to climb, for open magnolias, finest always at the top. The blooms sold to mamas or aunts or passing cars. These shaded, secret spots are places to feel the pulse of growing things, their response to the sting of the sun. Places to hear grass growing, petals opening, roots moving in the earth, doodlebugs hurrying in their tunnels. Places to wait, to hear the night coming. It falls so quickly here, as in all the tropics, without a twilight." An excerpt from The Perfumed City by Shirley Ann Grau, from the April 1968 issue of McCall's. Lovers and Other Strangers, from CHFI.com. Lovers and Other Strangers, from CHFI.com. Alannah Myles with Black Velvet and Robbie Robertson, Somewhere Down the Crazy River. Outside our daughter's bedroom window is the saucer magnolia that I planted when she was born. It now towers almost as high as the house. This is The Miracle of the Magnolia Tree. It was written by V.Bill, who has written quite a few instructional books and magazine columns. I'd like to share her miracle with you. And I quote, "One year, my husband Pat and I planted a very small magnolia tree outside our bedroom window. We watched it grow and gave it much loving care. Several years went by while we watched for the much anticipated blossoms, but the tree was still too young. The springs came and went, and we didn't spot a single bud or blossom. We could hardly wait to be cheered by the lovely flowers. Pat had been battling multiple sclerosis, and the disease was gaining ground. Spring came again, and as we looked out to view our tree, there it was, a breathtakingly large, waxy magnolia blossom, but oddly enough, only one blooming on the side of the tree closest to our window. We were incredibly gratified by the sight, and though Pat was quite ill and weak, the beautiful flower gave him much joy. He passed away that spring, and every time I see a magnolia tree in bloom, I think of the miracle of our magnolia tree." Unquote. The Miracle of the Magnolia Tree by V.Bill, who's written quite a few instructional books and magazine columns. Lovers and Other Strangers from CHFI.com. Bette Midler with The Wind Beneath My Wings and Josh Groban and You Raise Me Up. Lovers and Other Strangers on demand from CHFI.com. The background instrumental is a favorite of mine. It's called Magnolia Nights by Bill King. Finally this hour, this from the University Presbyterian. Man does not live by bread alone, but by beauty and harmony, truth and goodness, work and recreation, affection and friendship, aspiration and worship. Not by bread alone, but by the splendor of the firmament at night, the glory of the heavens at dawn, the blending of colors at sunset, the loveliness of magnolia trees, the magnificence of mountains. Not by bread alone, but by the majesty of ocean breakers, the shimmer of moonlight on a calm lake, the flashing silver of a mountain torrent, the exquisite patterns of snow crystals, the creations of artists. Not by bread alone, but by the sweet song of a mockingbird, the rustle of the wind in the trees, the magic of a violin, the sublimity of a softly lighted cathedral. Not by bread alone, but by the fragrance of roses, the scent of orange blossoms, the smell of new-mown hay, the clasp of a friend's hand, the tenderness of a mother's kiss. Not by bread alone, but by the lyrics of poets, the wisdom of sages, the holiness of saints, the biographies of great souls. Not by bread alone, but by comradeship and high adventure, seeking and finding, serving and sharing, loving and being loved. Lovers and Other Strangers from CHFI.com. Magnolia Nights and Sweet Dreams. I'm Don Jackson.